Good Kids Mad City. It's a youth organization in Chicago fighting to end violence and also bring more resources to their community. And we are very happy to be joined here as we move forward by Alycia, Kamil from Good Kids Mad City. Alycia, I really appreciate you being with us.
Hi, thank y'all for having me on here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. And, I really wanted to start here. When we were doing some of our election analysis here at Breakthrough, we were looking at a number of different places around the country. But one of the places we looked was in Inglewood, in Chicago, in the precinct closest to where Latrell Allen was murdered by Chicago police this summer, that I'm sure a number of people watching will remember. And what we found is that fewer people voted not only in that precinct, also in Inglewood. And as an organizer in the city of Chicago, I just want your thoughts. I mean, what does that say about what's going on in those communities that fewer people would vote in 2020 than in 2016?
I think there's a lot of different aspects that add into those numbers not being as large as maybe a lot of people would think. I think one of them is voter suppression. That was something that was a very present issue specifically in Chicago and specifically in these Black and brown communities for major reasons that we all know of, as systemic racism, systemic violence, and also just being an organizer and organizing with a lot of people from Inglewood. It's a very beautiful environment to be in. There's a lot of community. There's so many beautiful community-based orgs. There's a GKMD Inglewood chapter, and the organizing that happens between community members and the organizing that happens between people who are just actively there, it's just so strong and so knitted that when you see violence all the time, when you see all this money being put into different efforts and not community efforts, you then also kind of start to lose the hope and motivation for voting for a system that has historically never really helped you or benefited you in any sort of way. That two of the things is definitely voter suppression. It was very difficult for people to vote. Also not really taking into account COVID being very real, COVID being a really big thing. So even the act of Black people and older Black people in particular having to leave their house to go vote, and then mail-in ballots also were just a really difficult process. My dad and my grandma doing that, they just had a lot of issues with everything. And so just a lot of things systemically set up to already make it a really hard, to already kind of have a disadvantage for voting to happen in the first place. And then you're in a neighborhood where you see a person be shot by CPD and then nothing happens about it, or you are adjacent to neighborhoods that get all this funding from your mayor, and then you're still worried about school closures. So I feel a lot of communities in Chicago and a lot of organizers have just started really honing on the idea of building and engaging with our community and kind of leaving out the equation of elected officials, because we haven't really been shown, in particular Chicago elected officials, we haven't been shown support or any good pushback. So we just started to focus on healing and loving on each other.
Mm-hmm.
Alycia, now speaking on this issue of police violence, which I know Good Kids Mad City has done such incredible work in mitigating violence in the communities of Chicago, but there's been a lot of backlash against the slogan, of course, of defunding the police that's come about in this massive uprising, historic uprising we've seen against racist policing and, demanding justice for killer cops. Of course, the claim is always that community violence can only be stopped by police. And your organization has been on the ground now for a few years working with community and working, being part of the community, working within the community to deal with the issue of violence. So how do you respond to people who say that the only way to deal with the violence that we see in our communities is by having the police?
I think it's about addressing the issue of, one, a lot of people who are saying this are coming from sheltered or privileged backgrounds. So if you are mostly talking about a lot of white people who are very against the idea of defunding or abolishing the police, don't see police in the violent ways that Black people see police every single day. And particularly the dynamic between Chicago citizens, Black Chicago citizens, and Chicago police is just a whole different level of a dynamic that's you can't even get into without even realizing the harm that happens and the harm that's been happening. I would say I'll just do a couple numbers breakdown and then talk about the Peace Book, which is something that we're creating and working on right now. So annually, CPD gets $1.8 billion. That's $4 to $5 million a day, and that doesn't even count the money that's used to police settlements, all kinds of stuff around that. So we believe that if we were to just get 2% of Chicago's police budget and add that to GKMC and our Peace Book ordinance, which is an ordinance that we created to show that as communities, we do not need police in order to keep each other safe. No one who is in Chicago, no Black person who's in Chicago sees a police officer and feels that they're going to be protected. They feel like they're going to be targeted. So the idea that we have is to invest money into communities and to invest money into people who look like the people we're trying to protect to help prevent a lot of these issues. So we'd be putting money into mental health services, grocery stores, paying people who live in these communities and who know these people to help de-escalate problems and to help de-escalate issues, because that's what's needed. You're more likely to listen to somebody who looks like you. You're more likely to listen to somebody who lives across the street that you know than a police officer who's coming in from a suburb trying to arrest you. So the whole idea of the pushback behind the defund CPD or defund the police campaign is just about not understanding the everyday struggle that Black and brown people go through when we see police officers and the harm that we get when we see police officers. If we were to invest a third, a fourth of the budget into citizens of Chicago, into these Black and brown communities, you would see a drastic decline in all of these rates that people are so worried about, because you don't see it in places like Wicker Park or Uptown or all these very established and funded neighborhoods. So that money needs to go into Black and brown communities on the south and west sides of Chicago, because that's how we heal people. In order to heal people, you have to fund those people. So that's what we're for as an org.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I just love the concept of the Peace Book, even seeing it just from afar. I mean, I think it's one of the more creative ways I've really seen. And you know, I don't want to get too worked up here, but it's one of the things I find most frustrating, quite frankly. I don't know if it's about being Black in America or just existing here, is that so much of the work, like what you all do with the Peace Book, is just totally erased. I mean, people talk about it as if, well, there's this violence happening and no one cares and no one's doing anything about it, when it's really the exact opposite. And I just wonder from the conversations, that you all are able to have and the people you're able to engage with, especially young people, although I know you're engaging with all sorts of people across the city of Chicago, what are some of the issues you feel, I guess, aren't lifted up enough and deserve to, and what sort of solutions, I should say, deserve to be lifted up more in terms of what people really want to see?
I think people really need to start listening to youth more when it comes to organizing. I think that there is a really big ageism issue that kind of exists in organizing spaces, and then the way that just in life, ageism in terms of when listening to an 18 or 19-year-old, you're listening to them, but it's more so oh, well, I'm listening to you because you're speaking, but not actually listening and digesting the stuff that we're saying. And I think that is a really, really big issue, because if you see all these organizers and all these organizations, especially since the uprising that happened this summer, have been really youth-led. The defund CPD moment, the getting CPD out of CPS schools, just a lot of these youth-led movements and uprisings that have been happening have been people that I'm friends with. Everybody in GKMC is between the ages of 15 and 21,
Wow.
Youth organizations, and we're the ones who are putting together the Peace Book. We have people who are 14 to 18 passing out food every single Thursday, just stuff like this. We are actively working on this stuff. And so I think that youth need to be listened to more. I think that there needs to be more open-minded conversations around funding communities. I feel like it's a concept that people see, but it's a concept that people aren't really understanding that is really essential to help. If you're opening up all these grocery stores, if you're reopening all these schools that our mayor shut down, you will see drastic differences in not only just crime and lessening that, or this concept of crime itself, but obviously people who aren't going to school, who aren't eating the proper foods, who aren't doing this and that, are going to act in certain ways, understanding how funding literally is the solution to everything. And it's so important because we know we have this money, so we know it can be put into stuff that matters. So listening to youth, really being open-minded with people and having these important conversations like the ones we're having right now about reinvesting, defunding CPD, defunding police, and what that looks like. And then, I really cannot stress enough listening to youth, because this past summer alone, I've seen how just important youth organizers and youth organizations have been in this movement this past summer.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that, and that's the historical trend that we've seen. I think a lot of people are probably going to be watching this and who aren't in Chicago, who don't know this, hearing what you all are working on. And so before we let you go, I just want to ask you, how can people who are just hearing of Good Kids Mad City, how can they follow you, find you, support you?
Yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at GKMC18, on Facebook on Good Kids Mad City, and then through there you'll also see the projects we're working on, from our Peace Book initiative, from our mutual aid initiative, from our tutored initiative that we're going to get started up. So those are all the ways that you can get involved, and then also donate, stuff like that. So GKMC18 on both Twitter and Instagram, and then Good Kids Mad City on Facebook.
Alycia, Kamil, I really appreciate you joining us from Good Kids Mad City. Of course, I hope people do donate. I hope people do support you who are watching this right now. Fantastic work that you all are doing. Thank you so much for joining us on Breakthrough News.
Thank you for having me.